All right. Welcome back into the podcast. Very excited for this next guest. He's come on the last few years and he comes on again. You all know him very well. At K Fishbain on Twitter. He's part of the Bears beat on The Athletic, Kevin Fishbain, and he joins us now. Kevin, Bill Zimmerman, how are you doing?
I'm good, Bill. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you and yours. Glad your family is doing well. And I wanted to, just kind of chat. We're getting kind of towards the end of the year, not kind of, we are basically at the end of the year, especially for the Chicago Bears, who've been eliminated from playoff contention for a few weeks. And you kind of get to this wind down part of the season where, a lot of fans want to look ahead. Obviously, the coaching staff wants to continue to try and focus on this season and wins and growing and developing. So when we get to this part of the season as a beat writer, where do you like to focus? Where does your attention go? Because obviously, this is in essence a lost season at their current record. So what do you try and extrapolate from, these upcoming last two games and the previous couple games?
Yeah, Bill, it's a mix. I think that we all know, and you certainly know this, fans and readers love the off season, right? We live in a transactional world. We live in a world that speculation is king. So, look, I love doing mock drafts. I love reading mock drafts. I will read mock free agency stuff, so I like that, and we probably started doing some of that stuff, maybe more so just breaking down the roster. So stuff that's kind of looking ahead. Sundays and Mondays, it's to me are still towards breaking down the game. And what's made this season a little bit easier despite the record for our purposes are two things. One is Justin Fields, obviously, because I think regardless of what's around him, I think every Bears fan wants to continue learning about him and continue watching his progress. And I think those of us covering the team want to see that too. So, I mean, every snap he takes is still incredibly relevant to the future of this team. And the second thing that's made this season a little easier than compared to, say, the 2016 3-13 team. Even Bill, that 8-8 team in 2019 was brutal to cover.
Sure.
It's a great locker room. It really is. We actually, you and I are taping this on Tuesday afternoon. On Wednesday, fans will find out who our Media Good Guy Award is, and there were a lot of really good options this year. So it's just it's a good locker room. It's a very young locker room. Obviously, it's an incredibly young team. So you have a lot of rookies. You have a lot of guys on 1-year deals. So it's just I don't want people to think that these guys are enjoying the record. It's just there's no drama. They're not expectations. These guys saw Roquan Smith get traded. They saw Robert Quinn get traded. They understand what's going on. So, to go back to your question, I think as a beat writer, I want to really focus on, when I'm talking about the current team, I really want to focus on guys who might be part of this thing moving forward. Your Justin Fields, your Kyler Gordons, Velus Jones, Jaquan Brisker, guys like that. And then in the middle of the week, what normally is time for a beat writer to break down a matchup or look at interesting connections between the two teams or talk strategy, middle of the week I've kind of used towards looking ahead and talking about the roster. And I think we have another mock draft coming later this week, and my colleague Adam Johns and I today are working up just a story, just kind of talking about some of the scenarios for the Bears. So that's kind of how we've replaced what would normally be kind of Wednesday, Thursday minutia, if you will, from Hallis Hall.
Sure. Well, you kind of talked about, guys who are going to be part of this team moving forward. And I want to kind of focus on that because, there's not too much benefit in terms of breaking down Bears Lions and trying to go matchup by matchup, especially with all the injuries this has to the players, a lot of the players that will be part of this team moving forward. So let's kind of start with Ryan Poles' rookie class here. And I think a lot of the late round picks, there's Trenton Gill and things like that, you kind of get incompletes on because a lot of those six rounders and stuff didn't get a lot of opportunities after the preseason. But how do you feel Ryan Poles, obviously you can't really grade a draft class for a few years and let these guys develop, but how do you think Ryan Poles' draft class is trending at this point through one season?
Yeah, it's okay, Bill. I think and we can get into this later too. The problem that I feel like Ryan Poles is going to have, the challenge that awaits him, is this is not the year to have $170 million in cap space, right? Like this is just not. I mean, you're thrilled to have it, but it's not like it's not going to be an abundance of great free agents. The trade market, who knows what that's going to be like, but you're certainly not going to get the wide receivers that were on last year's trade market. So should be careful too, because obviously some guys might want to, guys we never thought of will get traded today could be asking for trades for March. So with that said, I kind of recalibrate. It's like you kind of almost needed more out of this draft class than maybe what we kind of thought. And it's not fair to the players he drafted, of course. It's just kind of the reality. So, I think you always hear people say you'd love to get 3 starters from any draft. And I think the Bears have that in Jaquan Brisker, Kyler Gordon, and Braxton Jones. I would say Brisker has proven to be a playmaker, and he was probably my favorite pick of the draft. I think Kyler Gordon has obviously had his struggles. It's such a tough position when you're a rookie to be the cornerback that every quarterback targets. He's coming on strong of late. Braxton Jones, I mean, the guys held it down all year. I give him a lot of credit. Does that mean the Bears are set for the next 10 years with him at left tackle? I don't know, but I think they have something there. And you know what? You mentioned Trenton Gill. They might have their punter for the next 15 years. I think that's not, it's not nothing to ignore. So you look at those 4 and you're like, okay, that you'll take that. I think a lot of GMs would take that, assuming Kyler Gordon, and Jaquan Brisker kind of stay on their track. But as I said, I think you kind of wanted more when you look at what's ahead. You wanted Tristan Ebner to show what he showed in the preseason, and he hasn't. You wanted Dominique Robinson to not have all of his quarterback hits literally in the first game of the season. Zach Thomas, who when they drafted him and you looked at his athletic traits and all those things, you're thinking, oh, he could be your starting right guard. The guy never cracked the second team, and now he's on the Rams. Ja'Tari Carter, who knows, could be something one day. He's never played, outside. I think he's maybe been active once or twice this year. Who am I missing here?
I think Doug Kramer was hurt.
Yeah, Doug Kramer's hurt, and I mean that's somebody who's going to probably be a career practice squad center,
most likely.
So, is it? If those 4 guys I mentioned, if 3 years from now we're still talking about those 4 guys, great, good draft. Oh, and Velus Jones.
Yeah, and that was where I was going to go, kind of with the last one with this rookie class, because we know the athletic traits and the speed that he possesses, and obviously. I don't think anyone even, and look, I criticized that draft pick at the time. I wasn't a big, I'm not a big fan of, taking guys that don't excel at the college level until they're literally 3 or 4 years older than their competition at that point. But, the athletic traits and everything were there. But, this has obviously been a struggle for him this year. He's lost playing time. He was active, then he's inactive. So, at this point, and some of it I think is unfair to do to a 3rd round pick, but he was the first offensive player taken for Justin Fields, in essence, in the draft. So, extra pressure and extra, expectations get put on him. So kind of where are you with Velus Jones? And do you see enough where maybe there is something there in the future, or is this, just going to be a 4-year roster player who just kind of disappears?
Yeah, I mean, I guess recency bias comes into play here. He just had that probably his best game with the 44-yard catch. And even, this is really small, but he had an 8-yard catch or in the game that was on a little bit of a slant kind of hitch pattern. I think that was his first catch that wasn't like a screen or a touch pass and a jet sweep. And so to me, it's little into tiny bit steps of growth. So I really want to see what he does in these last 2 games. I think there's something there to make him a gadget player. But the problem is, as you said, 3rd round pick, first offensive player taken by this regime. And you look at, he was joining a team whose wide receivers after Darnell Mooney were guys who wouldn't make a lot of rosters maybe. And so should have been an opportunity. I mean, he should have been starting if he was, considering what this team had. So I think in that essence is a little bit of a disappointment. But I think my thing too, Bill, is kickoff returners in the third round. It's just like I know a lot of people, when I said that in an article recently, a lot of people said, well, the Bears drafted the greatest one ever in the second round. Well, that's, okay, if Velus Jones becomes Devin Hester, great. You tip your cap. But I'm not ready to anoint the guy who fumbled 2 punts, lost his job. But he's really been, I mean, I just looked today, the Bears are third in the league in kickoff return average, and he's a big part of that. So, I think that's good. It's important, especially in Chicago, where you cut to November, December, you're gonna be returning a lot of kickoffs. But that's not a third round pick. You go find those guys other places. So for him to make that draft pick worthwhile, he's got to be doing what, like 500 yards of offense a year, something like that. Can he beat Tarik Cohen? Can he be just your gadget guy? So I'd like to see them find a way to utilize him on offense, because otherwise you're talking about a waste of a pick, frankly. If he can't get there, can he? I don't know. We still need to see more, but I think you can be a little bit more hopeful based on what he did on Sunday or Saturday, I should say.
Yeah, and I think that's the hope. Like you said, I think gadget player, and if in some way they can add to this offense where they have more offensive players where there can be less attention on him, I think that opens up the door to kind of have that gadget role a lot more. But I agree with you. Like you said, I think kickoff returns continue to lose importance as a part of this current NFL, with touchbacks being more prevalent and getting the ball to 25. It's just not as important as it used to be, and it'll probably continue to trend that way. But kind of overall, and kind of looking at this team, there's one rookie we haven't talked about because he was not part of the draft class, and I feel like you just got to bring him up because he's just a lot of fun to talk about, and that's Jack Sanborn. And what disappointing, obviously he doesn't get to finish the year, but it's kind of funny as after the Roquan trade, and I continue to have these interviews, and whether they be with Adam Johns or Brad Biggs or Courtney Cronin, I can't keep talking through the beat throughout the year. And he just keeps getting elevated and elevated and elevated with his play, to the point now that, if I'm Ryan Poles looking at the 2023 roster, I don't see any reason to not just pencil him in at Mike and not even, at least give him full opportunity to have a full season. I don't think there's any reason at this point to even consider replacing him.
No, yeah, I think that, like, at minimum, he's your starting Sam next year. I think that, like, you can bring in other guys and he gets the first reps at first team, and it's his job to lose, kind of thing. Look, I mean, I will hand up, like, when it came time for him to step in, I kind of was like, okay, I understand. He's the local guy. He's Wisconsin. Like, I get it. Why everyone's excited about him. He's got a great name, Jack Sanborn. I mean, that's like, how can you not be a linebacker with that name? But I just, like, look, there's a reason this guy was undrafted. There's a reason this guy hasn't cracked the depth chart. Yes, he's been nice on special teams, but that's probably who he is. And he really impressed me. And he was a great example of how far instincts can take you. Sure. And just being physical, and just, I mean, when he hits, you feel it in the press box, you feel it in the stands. And that's something that, can't necessarily be taught. So I give a lot of credit to him. I give a lot of credit to the coaching staff, for the way that he played, and he took advantage. I mean, I want to say he had more splash plays per game than Roquan Smith did. And, maybe it's a little unfair when you look at the way the games went. But he earned it, so I'm with you. I think that I say he should probably be your starting back, because the thing too, Bill, is the way this defense is, when you're talking about resources, those got to go to the will. Those got to go to the weak side linebacker. That's where you want to make your splash. Sure. You don't need to necessarily go spend a bunch of money or a premium draft pick on a Mike linebacker, especially when you got a guy who can be served more than serviceable and do the job. Again, I don't think they should ignore it. I'm not saying I'm not ready to say he's your starting Mike for the next 5 years. But I certainly like the idea that is one spot, as you kind of said, Ryan Poles doesn't need to worry about.
Yeah, because the way I look at it, I mean, I don't think you can be too confident on, when you look at the 2022 roster, guys you're comfortable starting in 2023. I don't think that number is more than about 7 or 8. I haven't looked at it specifically. Maybe it's 10. So they're not going to be able to replace everybody in one off season, even with the obscene amount of cap space that they have. So I think you look at guys like Sanborn and go, well, absolutely, let's give him the opportunity. There's, like you said, there's not a point to spend resources there right now. Obviously want to get to a couple more things before I let you go. Offensive line, you mentioned Braxton Jones, Tevin Jenkins, another guy who has performed really well. But other than that, I think there's been a lot of struggles up front there. I know the run, it's kind of an odd offensive line that run blocks so well and struggles more in the pass block. It's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde situation. But, Cody Whitehair, since he came back from injury, has not been as good as he was at the beginning of the season. Now, obviously, he's hurt again, and I wonder if he has played his final game in a Chicago Bears uniform. Doesn't seem like Larry Borum is the answer out there, and I definitely think they need to upgrade at center. So, with what kind of, if you were in charge, what kind of off-season approach would you have trying to rebuild this offensive line?
Yeah, well, I think you put it, nicely there, Bill. I think at minimum you need three brand new starters. I can't sit there and say any of those guys you kind of just went through outside Braxton Jones and Tevin Jenkins and shoot. I don't think they should be, precluded from finding a new left tackle or a new right guard if one pops into their hands. It's just too important of a position group. It's one that has eluded this franchise for so many years. It's one that the GM and assistant GM are supposed to be experts in. When going back to what we talked about earlier with the free agency class, you saw, Eldon Jenkins and Jack Conklin sign those extensions, and that's kind of going to help water down the class. You're not going to take an offensive lineman if you stay at 2 or 3, most likely. So, but you got to find guys. I just think that I wonder if that's a position you look back and, they made that play for Ryan Bates, which is something I think we forget about, when everyone talks about, oh, they didn't do anything this offseason. Well, they did try to give an offensive lineman a $7 million a year deal, and the Bills matched it. But I wonder if that's one of those maybe regrets that they didn't at least make some kind of splash on another guy in free agency, or maybe not take it, or they didn't take an offensive lineman one of those first 3 picks, because, and look, the Tevin Jenkins thing's been a great revelation. The Braxton Jones thing's been a great revelation. Can you imagine if those things didn't happen, Bill? I mean,
sure.
Like we're talking about this offensive line needing 3 starters. That is with the fact that a 5th round pick out of Southern Utah has held his own at left tackle, and a guy who spent most of his college career and his rookie season at tackle ended up playing really well for you at right guard. Nobody saw that coming with Tevin Jenkins. If you told me on July 27th, he would have played as well as he did, I'd say no way. I'd say for what I would have said. I said, Bill, I would have said for what team? And that's how crazy things were late July. So they got really lucky with those two. Lucas Patrick's an interesting part of this equation. I gotta tell you, inside that building, and they weren't shy about it, that was the guy they were totally banking on being the glue for this offense. And he has the thumb injury the second day of training camp. And then by the time he's back, he's playing some guards, he can't snap. I think that he still might be your starting center next year. I mean, that's how much Ryan Poles liked this guy. And the flip side of that is they liked him so much they only gave him a 2-year deal worth whatever it was, like $7 million. So again, that's not a spot you can just ignore, but you wonder what this offensive line would look like if he had actually started at center the way he was supposed to. It's just something that it's easy to forget that, like, they were really putting a lot of confidence in what he was going to bring to this offensive line, and he never got an opportunity to do it because of injuries. Does he get that opportunity next year? I think they got to be open to other spots, but yeah, I think you got to do a lot of work there. But as you said earlier, there's so many needs that maybe that's why you go with Lucas Patrick as your starting center next year, because you can only replace so many of these guys in one offseason.
Right. And I know he had 7 or 8 snaps, I think, whatever it was, at center for the entire year, because he was stuck at guard because of the situation at hand. And look, I know guard and center are 2 different positions. I know we've seen plenty of examples of guys who perform well at center and can't at guard, and vice versa, but he struggled so much at guard. I just can't, as a Bears fan, as someone who covers the Bears as well, I can't sit there and be comfortable if they say we're penciling Lucas Patrick at center and they don't have viable competition for him. Maybe it's you roll the dice and see if Luke Weipler is there in the third round or something. I don't know exactly where he's going to end up, but something like that where you can draft a center and then there's your competition. But if it's Lucas Patrick's job to have, I would not feel confident in that decision.
No, and I don't blame you. I don't. And look, Lucas Patrick himself can't necessarily expect that. It's going to be the final year of a 2-year deal that wasn't worth a ton of money. So, I just bring that up because, again, I harken back to when they signed him, and then just kind of there was just this confidence in what that guy was going to bring. I don't know if I don't think he was voted captain, but you could just tell that he was a loud voice in that room, and that he was going to be the guy that set the tone. Now, he might have been setting the tone more intangibly and not actually on the field with his play. But yeah, that's just something as we get to next year, just kind of file away how much the GM really liked him. And that, because that could kind of tell you when you're looking at who they're bringing in. But I think they got to bring in somebody else and give somebody a look there, especially if we're trying to build this thing for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking of the long term, I think a lot of Bears fans are hopeful they do have the long term answer at quarterback. Justin Fields has been a lot of fun this year. Obviously, we got to talk about him before we wrap up. And just kind of your experience, covering him and what you've seen. I know certain people on the beat and in Chicago media and fans as well are not satisfied with what they've seen in the passing game. And I think there's a lot of factors that play into that, especially when Mooney is out and Claypool's out and, he doesn't really have a lot of viable options to throw to. And also the game plan that Getsy's been putting forward on a lot of weeks. I think obviously those factors play into it, because when you do look at the advanced passing stats that kind of break things down, it's a lot of positives for Justin Fields throwing the football, not just running the football. So kind of, with a couple games to go, where are you and how comfortable are you with Justin Fields, not being the quarterback for the next few years, but a guy who they can legitimately win with and be, basically a top 10 quarterback moving forward?
Well, if you told me in June that the Bears would have 3 wins and be lined up for the number 2 pick of the draft, I would be probably telling you, well, I should start watching Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. So, the fact that they're in this position and you don't need to be doing that, I think says a lot about Fields, but also says a lot about how far this team needs to go. I done things that I've never seen before. Like when the amount of times at Soldier Field now, I can just sit there and you just go, he's gone. It's incredible what he's done. I think since the mini bye, his accuracy as a passer has really improved. I don't understand what's going on with the swing passes. It's a very strange little fluky thing. I think Luke Getsy was actually asked about it and he kind of poo-pooed the question, but it does seem like that's not Fields' favorite throw because that's been a little shaky. But I bring that up because one of the things I had written about earlier in the season was he wasn't making layups. Like he wasn't hitting open guys in the short to intermediate. I think he's done a much better job of that since the offense has done better. But look, the guy, a lot of room for him to grow as a passer. And there are, I've kind of been always careful to say, as you kind of said, he's got the worst receiving core in football right now. He's got maybe one of the worst offensive lines in football right now. But he has to be better. And I like to think he would say the same thing. So the Bears are in a good spot because they don't have to be studying Bryce Young and CJ Stroud and Will Levis, and they can trade that pick to somebody else who wants one of those guys. They can have a full offseason to now they really know what Justin Fields can do, what he's capable of doing, and kind of build from there, which is good. But there's, I guess you've got Mahomes, Allen, Herbert. Help me out here, like those young quarterbacks that are just
Burrow.
Yeah, like they're just top of the cream of the crop right now, right? Like he's nowhere near those guys right now. And that's not to say he can't get there. I think the guy's got all the tools in the world. I've always thought that he's got all the tools in the world. But I think it's okay to want to see it. I want to see more. I want to keep watching this guy grow. I want to keep watching this guy ascend. So I'm hopeful for him and what the Bears can do. But I'm not building a statue outside Soldier Field yet.
Yeah,
I understand it's been a very it's been a very touchy subject because I'm trying to find myself in this middle ground, which you think is okay, but part of being in the middle ground is when you say nice things about him. Well, wait a second, you're going way too overboard. But then when you're saying anything critical, whoa, it's way too critical. I understand it's a hot button topic in town, and I love it. That's one of the reasons I love covering this team is the passion of the fan base and the passion when it comes to this position that has just been, this city's been a black hole for quarterbacks forever. So, is he it, as you said, it's I'm not ready to say he's it for the next 5-10 years, but they have something that they have never had as long as I've been covering them, that they maybe haven't had ever. It's just a question of what is that ceiling, and I don't know what that ceiling is yet. I don't know if he could ever be in that group of guys I just mentioned, and that's okay. He doesn't need to necessarily get to that group because of what he does for you as a runner, and if you build the team around him the right way, that's fine. It's probably unfair to even say I need him to be the next Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert. It's just interesting to have watched this season, and there's just such little sample size of him throwing the football. Right. And I just want to see more because I want to learn more about what he's capable of, and I just don't know if we've seen. And that's I'd say more as a positive. I just don't know if we've seen what he can do.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment, and that was my biggest concern, going into this year was the short game, and like you said, missing the layups, and to me, that was a big thing that derailed Josh Rosen. I mean, you go find Josh Rosen NFL highlights on YouTube, and you will find beautiful deep ball after beautiful deep ball after beautiful deep ball. But anytime you need to throw the ball less than 10 yards, the ball was all over the place, poor decisions, turnovers. And that's where I was worried with Fields, is that he needed that short game to come together. And we're seeing that come together. But the thing, and I know most of this is with the legs at this point. I do know he's made some dynamic throws and stuff, and I have confidence in the arm talent. But the one thing that is just so unique to this season for me is when, and I'll just bring up Trubisky as an example and Cutler as an example. When you heard people around the league talking about Cutler, they always talked about the arm, and they didn't talk about anything else about Cutler in a positive. It was always about the arm. Trubisky was always he's a great teammate. He's a great guy. You always heard about the intangibles he had in the locker room, but you didn't hear as much on the field. With Fields around the league, and a lot of it is players who go up against him, who sit there and basically have their jaw dropped and go, I've never seen this. I didn't see him do this at Ohio State. I didn't know he was capable of this. There's defensive players who sit here after Bears games, and they won the game and probably won it by more than a touchdown, the way a lot of these games went. But they sit there and go, this guy is something, because we've never seen anything like it. And that, to me, is the most exciting thing, that this isn't, just, the Athletic and the Chicago Tribune or Windy City Gridiron. They're going, hey, I think Justin Fields is something. I mean, this is Darius Slay. This is, elite defensive players who are going, this guy's unbelievable.
And you bring up a good point too, Bill, because, when was the last time an opposing team was scheming to stop a Bears quarterback?
Johnny Lujak?
Right. With Trubisky, there were a lot of things they were scheming to do that they felt they could, kind of confuse him. And we still remember the challenges he had with zone defenses during his time here. And there were certain things you could do coverage drives with Jay that can maybe goad him into interceptions. With Fields, it's they're scheming around a strength of his, and they have to figure out. Now the Bills were obviously onto something. I go back, actually, the Falcons were, I think, the first team to really do this. And if you go back and you look at the offense since that Falcons game, has really dropped precipitously. Mm-hmm. The way some of these teams are defending, and to me, these are growing pains that are going to come with the new offense. And you obviously, in that span, you've lost Mooney, you've lost Claypool. You've had offensive line injuries, so there's other reasons the offense is struggling. You're playing much better teams. But this is something for Luke Getsy and Matt Eberflus to work on this offseason that, Atlanta did something. I don't know if they were the first to do it necessarily, but other teams are doing similar things. And it's worked on Fields. So now it's like, all right, how do we adapt to that? And part of adapting to that is setting it up where if you're going to stay out wide like that, or if you're going to spy me in the middle, I'm just going to sit in the pocket and launch passes to my guys. But you need those guys to get open, Bill, and you need to have the protection to be able to stand there and do that. So all these things need to come together for it. So that's a good point that the way that people talk about Fields is just unlike we've seen the way people talked about other quarterbacks here. So it's been, as I said, it's been fun to watch. What I'm really looking forward to this offseason is really tapping into other people around the league and seeing what they think of him, because he's so rare and so unique in what he does. I think a lot of people who are just so ingrained in the way a quarterback is supposed to be just don't know what to do with themselves, and they just don't know. Like I texted a few personnel people earlier in the season when this was starting, like around the Miami and Detroit games, and they were kind of like, well, what happened in the final drive? Like that was their first response. And so there's still, and it's still something that obviously Fields needs to work on, certainly, but there's a lot of reasons those fourth quarter drives stalled. But I'm interested to see when we go full season, like what is kind of the tenor around the league. We know what the players think. I think we know what a lot of coaches think. But I'd be curious if some people who were not sold on that style are saying like, they've got something here because we've never seen anything like this.
All right. Last thing for you here before I let you go, the coaching staff and specifically Eberflus, just, as someone covering the team, can you really even give a fair analysis to a coaching staff, especially the head coach? Because I mean, obviously the record sits there and says, well, there hasn't been a great job as a coaching staff. You can't have 3 wins and think that it was a phenomenal job. But I sit here at the same time and go, I don't think it matters if it was Belichick, Tomlin, McVay, Shanahan, John Harbaugh. Maybe would they have 4 or 5 wins? Maybe, but I can't sit there and say that this is a coaching issue that has it's a lack of talent on the roster issue. So how can you, as someone covering the team, kind of evaluate the job that Matt has done in year 1?
I think when I speak to the way the locker room has been, and to your first question, I think Eberflus gets credit for that. I mean, you see the culture. Here's my problem with kind of culture talk, Bill. When a team is 13-3, the culture is great. When a team is 4-12, the culture is probably bad, right? This is the rare situation where it's 3-13, the culture is okay, but it's the first year, so of course it takes what happened in Denver. Or it happened in Jim Sula, and you think about all those things.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, you needed to kind of start over a little bit of house all and really instill something different here. So I think he succeeded in that. I think my devil's advocate would be, how much better is the New York Giants roster than what the Chicago Bears have? They got nothing at wide receiver, right? I know they got the first round pick who's done really well at tackle. They've got Dexter Lawrence. They've got a couple nice players on defense. But I think the Giants are an example where you're hearing a lot of talk about Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, and deservedly so. And I think obviously the team has its limitations. But I think they are a team that you can kind of look at them alongside the Bears, a whole new regime, kind of rebuilding, a young quarterback that's a little bit unproven, not a lot of talent, and they're a win away from the playoffs. Now, again, different situations. The Bears traded away 2 of their best players in defense. They've had a lot of injuries. All those, I think they're going to end up with the hardest schedule in football when it's all said and done. So it's like, so because of that, like I'm not going to give Eberflus a total pass because the roster is bad. I'm not going to say, well, the roster is bad, so it's okay, because we've seen other teams do it. And maybe people who know the Giants better will say it wasn't all Daboll, it was all this, and this. I don't know. I'm not there. But I guess the question that I'm going to have is, is Matt Eberflus going to be different than John Fox? Like when John Fox got here, No, obviously very different coaches. It was the first time I coached versus a guy in John Fox that was, a different part of his career.
Sure.
But John Fox came here and he was a perfect coach for a transition because he set the tone in terms of culture and he got things back on track in that realm. But the team wasn't good. And then Matt Nagy gets here and you have this kind of 2018 spark. When the Bears have their spark, is Matt Eberflus going to be the head coach? And I think he certainly can be. I think we've certainly seen reason to believe that, yeah, when they build this thing to where Ryan Poles wants to build it, Eberflus is the right coach to lead them in that direction. I'm kind of posing that question to you and kind of listeners. Like when you think about Eberflus, you think about this league, you think about what you've seen, you think about Justin Fields, all those things. I think it's an interesting thought exercise. I know I'm not trying to take like the coward's way out here and not give you an answer on that. I just think it's something to think about. Like, if Ryan Poles succeeds in building a team that is a consistent playoff team, is Matt Eberflus the head coach of that team? That's kind of that's kind of the way I kind of, I guess, throw the question to your question, right? Because he could have done some nice things this year, but like, is he the guy, or do you need the offensive guy, or do you need someone who's got more experience? And it could also be that he is the right guy. He just needs maybe different setups of assistant coaches, or it could be, as you said, this is the absolute right staff. Poles hit this out of the park. We just don't really fully see it yet because of the roster and because of the things that have gone against them this year. So I've liked what I've seen from Eberflus. I think the players like him a lot. You've seen the way they buy into a lot of his philosophies. The question for me is, like, it's going to be really, really difficult for them to make a huge jump next year for all the reasons we've outlined. Now, Fields takes another massive step, then everything out the window. That doesn't matter who's around him. Like, he could just lift, rising tide lifts all boats situation. But let's say this thing is really going to take until 2024, right? Is that you get to that point? Is that, and then you see the rosters there? Is he the right coach of the roster? I don't know. He might be.
Yeah, and to kind of answer your question, the question to the question, I would sit there and say that I really think, kind of based on everything we've seen, I don't think you can do a in Flus we trust, in Poles we trust with just, blind optimism that they're going to get this done. We've seen, I think, certain ways both of them handled things where there were issues, but on the flip side, both of them have done some excellent things as well in the first year. So I think it's fair to just kind of say that it's still kind of out there, and whether these guys will be the guys moving forward, especially at the head coaching spot. And you kind of sit there and say, I think next year, can they jump to 10-7, 11-6? I know Bears fans are going to want to hope that with a really high draft pick and all the money they have to spend. But I think at that point, with more talent infused on the roster and everything, and can he guide them to that next level, that next step? I think that's really, will you have your answer 100% in 2023? Probably not still, but unless they go 2-15, then you're going to sit there and know you don't have the right guy. But at that point, I think you can have a better assessment of he's the guy, because I've taken more of a wait and see approach with both these guys, because I'll be honest, I was fully in on Matt Nagy. I thought it was a great hire. I was fully on board, and it took me a little bit longer to come around to everyone else to realize that this wasn't quite the right fit, because of how positive I was with that hire originally, and of course 2018. And you think, oh, absolutely, this was it. So, I think, you never know what you have in a head coach until you kind of see it play out a little. And I think 2023 is a really important year for Matt Eberflus.
Yeah, and forgive me for being also, I mean, you've followed this team for your whole life, so it's when I've covered this team for 10 years, it's hard for me to be like, they got it. That's it. He's the guy, whether it's the GM, the head coach, the quarterback, the defensive tackle, the court, the safety. It's like, it's one of the, I've seen some things, Bill. I have seen some things in that building, and it can be a little hard to, and that's why I totally, like, I would never, going back to the Fields conversation, I would never want to tell somebody they cannot be excited about Justin Fields. Like, let your mind wander, dream big, totally for it. Like, I'm not going to get there myself. That's not, what I wouldn't do that for anybody necessarily. But it's just like, you sit here and you think about all the things that, the players and the coaches and the GMs. Like, this is my 10th year on the beat, Bill, and this is already my 4th head coach and
That's
third
insane.
third GM.
Wow.
So, and it's only 10 seasons, right? So it's hard to, like, and that shouldn't be reason to assume X, Y, and Z won't work. But there's also certain people in place that have been the constants in those full 10 years that make very important decisions about the team. So, it's look, I think that, as you kind of said, I think you look at the way they played against the Eagles and in the first half against the Bills, and you say, hey, this coach got these guys ready to go. And you look at the way some of the young players have looked in the secondary. You look at Braxton Jones. You can say, hey, this GM, he's got something here. Like, you can see the way this is going to potentially build. You go back to some of your favorite offensive games. You can say nice stuff about Luke Getsy. So there's little things there. There's little reasons to have the hope. But yeah, I mean, if this team is just building to a set, because the Dolphins are kind of on a similar plane. If you look at Tua's career, and you can say the Eagles too with Jalen Hurts and the way that they built around him. But the problem is, like, those teams took off in year 3 for their quarterbacks. It's hard for me to be ready for the Bears to do that with Justin Fields next year, because there's not going to be able to match the type of talent those teams put around their quarterbacks. There's just not enough guys available. So that's where you are going to rely on Matt Eberflus and his philosophies and his coaching staff to kind of help do, frankly, what the Giants have done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm old enough to remember when Dave Wannstedt was the best hire, slam dunk, coming off those Cowboys teams. He was going to be the guy for the Bears for the next decade. So it never quite works out as you hope when you're a Bears fan. But Kevin, thanks for so much time again. He's at K Fishbain on Twitter. I'm sure you follow him already, but if you don't, give him a follow. Great content all the time on Twitter and obviously on his articles on The Athletic. Kevin, thanks for so much time. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me, Bill.